A Mafia boss watched his deaf son sit in complete silence for 7 years. Then a homeless girl hummed softly by the fountain, and for the first time, his son turned toward sound. What the boss didn't know, the girl who gave his son a miracle was the daughter of the people he'd destroyed. Marco Leone didn't believe in miracles. He believed in money, power, and the cold efficiency of fear. But on that Tuesday evening in October, as the sun bled orange across the city park, something happened that made him question everything. His son, Nico, sat perfectly still on the wooden bench beside him. The boy was 7 years old, with dark curls that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed to watch the world from behind glass. He had been deaf since birth, profoundly, completely deaf. No hearing aids worked. No surgery could help. The doctors had used words like irreversible and structural damage until Marco stopped listening. Tonight, like every Tuesday and Friday, Marco had brought Nico here to watch the sunset. Not because the boy could hear the birds or the distant traffic, but because the routine seemed to calm him. Structure. Predictability. These were things Marco understood. The park was nearly empty. A jogger passed by, earbuds in. An elderly man fed pigeons near the oak trees. And by the fountain, maybe 30 feet away, sat a girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. Barefoot. Dirt-streaked jeans. A cardboard sign rested against the fountain's edge, though Marco couldn't read it from here. Her hair was tangled and sun-bleached, and she held a dented tin cup in one hand. Just another street kid. The city was full of them. Marco looked away, checking his phone. 3 missed calls from his underboss, Vincent. He'd deal with those later. Right now, this hour belonged to Nico. Then he heard it. A sound so faint, he almost missed it beneath the fountain's burble. The girl was humming. Not loudly, just a soft, wandering melody that seemed to rise and fall like breathing. It wasn't a song Marco recognized. It didn't sound practiced or performative. It was barely there at all. He glanced at her, mildly annoyed. If she started asking for money, his driver would handle it. But then Nico moved. It was subtle, just a slight turn of his head. His chin lifted maybe an inch. His eyes shifted toward the fountain. Marco's breath caught. Nico never responded to sound. Not doorbells. Not shouting. Not the crack of thunder that had once shattered Marco's office window. The boy lived in silence, so complete that sometimes Marco wondered if his son even understood what sound was. Yet now, Nico's head was angled toward the girl. His small body had tensed, the way someone might lean forward to hear a whisper. Marco's pulse hammered. He forced himself to stay calm, to not react. He watched his son's face with the intensity he usually reserved for interrogations. The girl kept humming. The melody shifted, dropped lower, then climbed again, wordless and strange. Nico's right hand lifted from his lap. His fingers curled slightly, then relaxed. His breathing changed. Marco could see his son's chest rising faster now, shallow and quick. "Nico," Marco whispered, though he knew it was pointless. The boy didn't look at him. His entire focus remained locked on the fountain, on the girl, on something Marco couldn't see or hear the way his son apparently could. This wasn't possible. 7 years of specialists, surgeries, therapies. 7 years of being told his son would never hear a single word. And now. The girl stopped humming. The silence felt massive. Nico blinked, and just like that, the tension left his body. He slumped back against the bench, his gaze drifting away to the trees, to nothing. The moment was over. Marco sat frozen, his mind racing. Coincidence? A trick of the light? Maybe Nico had seen something, a bird, a movement, and Marco had simply misread his son's reaction. But he knew better. He hadn't survived 20 years in his world by ignoring instinct. And every instinct he had was screaming that what he'd just witnessed was real. He stood slowly, his legs unsteady. "Stay here," he murmured to Nico, knowing his son couldn't hear him, but saying it anyway. His bodyguard, Paolo, appeared from the shadows near the parking lot, always watching. "Keep him close," Marco said quietly.
Paolo nodded.
Marco walked toward the fountain, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel path. The girl didn't run. She didn't even look up. She was tracing something in the dirt with her finger, patterns, maybe letters. He stopped a few feet away. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd thought. 15, maybe. Her face was gaunt, her clothes worn thin. But her eyes, when she finally glanced up, were sharp.
Clear.
Not dulled by drugs or desperation.
You were humming, Marco said.
His voice came out rougher than intended. She studied him for a moment, then shrugged. Is that illegal?
No.
He paused, unsure how to phrase it. My son. He reacted to it. So, he's deaf. The girl's expression didn't change. Maybe he felt it. Vibrations. She tapped the fountain's stone edge. Sound moves through more than air. Marco stared at her. She spoke with a strange certainty, not like someone guessing, but like someone who knew. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated. Lena. Lena, I need you to do that again.
Tomorrow.
Same time. I'm not a performing monkey. I'll pay you. Name your price. She looked past him, toward Nico on the bench. The boy was rocking slightly now, his hands folded in his lap. When she looked back at Marco, something in her face had softened, but only barely. I don't want your money, she said. Everyone wants money. Not everyone. Marco felt frustration rising. He wasn't used to negotiation, especially not with homeless teenagers. But something kept him from pushing harder. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at Nico. Not with pity, with recognition. Please, he said, and the word felt foreign in his mouth. Just once more. Let me bring him back tomorrow. Lena was quiet for a long moment. The fountain splashed behind her. Somewhere across the park, a child laughed. Fine, she said finally. Tomorrow. But if it doesn't work, you leave me alone.
Deal.
He turned to walk back to Nico, but her voice stopped him. Your son, she called. What's his name? Nico. She nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. He heard me. I could tell. Marco wanted to ask how she knew, what made her so certain, but she'd already looked away, back to her patterns in the dirt. He returned to the bench and sat beside his son. Nico leaned against him, warm and solid and silent. Marco wrapped an arm around the boy's shoulders and stared at the fountain, at the strange girl who'd hummed a melody that shouldn't have mattered. For the first time in 7 years, Marco Leone felt something he'd thought was dead. Hope.
And it terrified him.
Marco didn't sleep that night. At 11 p.m., he sat in his study with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched, watching Nico sleep through the baby monitor on his desk. The boy's chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm, unaware that his father's world had just tilted sideways. By midnight, Marco had made his decision. He lifted his phone and dialed Dr. Catherine Reeves, the best neurologist in the city. She'd examined Nico 3 times over the years, always with the same conclusion: permanent, irreversible hearing loss. Marco, it's midnight, she answered, her voice thick with sleep. I need you at Presbyterian Hospital.
Now.
Private wing. Bring your equipment. What happened? Is Nico hurt? Just come. Please. 20 minutes later, Marco carried Nico through the hospital's private entrance. The boy had woken confused, signing questions Marco couldn't fully answer. Hospital?
Why?
Am I sick? Marco signed back the only thing he could. Trust me. Dr. Reeves met them in a soundproof examination room, her gray hair pulled back hastily. 2 technicians were setting up monitoring equipment, sensors, electrodes, computers with screens full of colored lines. Talk to me, she said, pulling on latex gloves. Marco explained what happened at the park. As he spoke, he watched her face for skepticism, but she remained neutral, professional. You're certain he turned toward the sound source? She asked. Completely certain. Could he have seen something? Movement, light reflection? His eyes were closed at first. Then he opened them and looked directly at her. Dr. Reeves was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Let's see what we find. They attached sensors to Nico's head, small adhesive pads connected to thin wires. The boy sat patiently, used to medical procedures by now. He signed to Marco. Will this help me here? Marco's throat tightened. He signed back. Maybe. We're trying. Dr. Reeves dimmed the lights and positioned herself behind Nico, out of his line of sight. She held a small device that could produce tones at different frequencies. We'll start with standard tests, she explained. Pure tones, different volumes. Watch the monitors. She activated the device. A sound Marco couldn't hear. Ultrasonic, she'd said, filled the room. Nothing. The colored lines on the monitors stayed flat. She tried another frequency. Then another. Each time, Nico sat motionless, his brain activity unchanged. This is consistent with his previous tests, Dr. Reeves said quietly. Profound sensory neural hearing loss. No response to. Try something else, Marco interrupted.
Try.
I don't know. Music. Humming. Dr. Reeves frowned. Marco, that's not how we. Please. She hesitated, then handed her phone to one of the technicians. Pull up something simple. A cappella, no instruments. Vocal only. The technician nodded and searched briefly, then played something through a high-quality speaker. A woman's voice singing a folk melody, clear and unaccompanied. For 10 seconds, nothing changed. Then one of the monitors flickered. Dr. Reeves leaned forward sharply.
Wait.
Play that again. The technician restarted the track. This time, they all saw it. A subtle spike in neural activity in Nico's auditory cortex. Not much, barely a blip, but it was there.
Real.
Measurable. My God, Dr. Reeves whispered. She moved around to face Nico, her expression intense. The boy watched her curiously.
Try humming, Marco said.
Like the girl did. Soft. Dr. Reeves looked uncertain but began to hum, a low, gentle sound, barely more than a breath with tone. The monitors spiked again. Stronger this time. Nico's eyes widened. His hand reached up to touch his own ear, confused. He could feel something, not sound as hearing people knew it, but something. Stop, Dr. Reeves said suddenly, cutting off the humming. She turned to Marco, her face pale. This shouldn't be possible. But it is. His cochlear structures are severely damaged. There's no pathway for sound to. She stopped, staring at the monitors. Unless what? Unless it's not traveling through the normal pathway. Bone conduction can transmit vibrations directly to the inner ear, bypassing damaged structures. But his response is too specific, too targeted. It's almost like she trailed off, lost in thought. Like what? Like his brain is recognizing patterns in the vibrations. Not as sound exactly, but as information. Certain frequencies, certain tonal qualities. They're getting through somehow. Marco felt his heart pounding. Can you fix it? Make it stronger? Dr. Reeves removed her gloves slowly, her hands shaking slightly. Marco, I don't even understand what's happening yet. This kind of response is extremely rare. I've read about cases in research papers, but I've never seen it myself. And it's unstable. It could fade completely, or it could develop. We have no way to predict, but there's a chance. There's
something.
Yes, she looked at Nico, who was signing questions to Marco again. You need to find that girl. Bring her back. Whatever she did, however she did it, we need to study it.
Marco nodded.
He'd already decided that hours ago. I'll find her, he said. By dawn, he had 6 of his most trusted men searching every park, subway station, and street corner in the city. They had one job, locate Lena. And this time, Marco wouldn't take no for an answer. They found her at 7:15 a.m., near the entrance to the Grand Street subway station. Vincent called Marco personally. We got her, boss. Want us to bring her in? No, Marco was already grabbing his coat. I'm coming there. Don't let her leave, but don't touch her either. Understood. 15 minutes later, Marco's black sedan pulled up to the curb. He could see Lena immediately. She sat cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box, that same dented tin cup beside her. She was singing this time, not humming. Her voice carried clear and strong over the morning rush of commuters, a melody that sounded old, maybe foreign. Vincent and another man, Tony, stood 10 feet away, trying to look casual. They weren't succeeding. Both were 6 feet tall, dressed in dark suits, and obviously watching her.
Marco approached slowly.
A few commuters dropped coins into her cup as they passed, barely glancing at her. The city had taught people not to see the homeless, to look through them like glass. But Lena saw everything. Her eyes tracked Marco as he walked closer, though she didn't stop singing. She finished the verse, let the last note hang in the air, then went silent. "You found me faster than I expected," she said.
"I'm motivated."
"I can see that." She glanced at Vincent and Tony. "Are those your pet gorillas?" Marco almost smiled. "Almost. They work for me. They won't hurt you." That's reassuring. Her tone suggested it wasn't. Marco crouched down to her level, his knees protesting slightly. Up close, in morning light, he could see details he'd missed yesterday: a thin scar above her left eyebrow, calluses on her fingertips, eyes that were pale gray like winter sky. "We went to the hospital last night," he said quietly. "With Nico." Her expression shifted, just slightly. Interest, maybe. Or concern. "And the doctors confirmed it." He responded to sound. "Not much, but enough to measure. You weren't wrong." Lena was quiet for a moment. She picked up a coin from her cup, a quarter, and turned it over in her fingers. "I know I wasn't wrong." "How did you know?" "I told you. Vibrations. Some people feel them more than others." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." She met his eyes directly. "What do you want from me?" Marco took a breath. "I want you to meet Nico again. Just once. Let the doctors observe, measure what happens. If it works, if he responds again, maybe they can figure out how to help him. And if it doesn't work, then I'll leave you alone. I promise." Lena studied him for a long time. Behind them, the subway entrance swallowed and released waves of people. The city moved around them, indifferent. "You're not used to asking for things, are you?" she said finally. The observation caught him off guard.
"No."
"You're used to taking?" Marco felt something cold settle in his chest. She'd said it without accusation, just simple fact. Somehow that made it worse. "Yes," he admitted. "So why ask me? Why not just force me?" It was a fair question. Marco had considered it. He had the power, the resources. He could have had her brought to the hospital whether she agreed or not. But something had stopped him. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at Nico. Maybe it was that word, please, that had felt so foreign in his mouth yesterday. "Because," he said slowly, "if I force you, it won't work. Whatever this is, it needs to be real." Lena tilted her head slightly, considering. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. It wasn't cruel or mocking. It was genuine, surprised, almost delighted.
"Real."
"That's funny coming from you."
"Why?"
"Because nothing about you is real. Your suit probably costs more than most people make in a month. Those men behind you would hurt someone if you asked them to. And you're sitting here, pretending to be some concerned father, when we both know you're something else entirely." Marco's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." She stood up suddenly, brushing off her jeans. For a moment, Marco thought she was going to walk away. But she didn't. Instead, she picked up her cup, counted the coins inside, maybe $3 total, and dumped them into her pocket. She folded her cardboard sign and tucked it under her arm. "One time," she said. "I'll meet your son one time. After that, you don't send your gorillas looking for me again. Deal?" Marco stood, relief flooding through him.
"Deal. When?"
"This afternoon. 3 o'clock. But not at a hospital." "Where then?" "Riverside Park. The North End, by the boat basin. Somewhere he feels safe." She looked at him directly. "Children know when they're being studied like lab rats. It changes things." Marco wanted to argue, to insist on controlled conditions and medical supervision. But something in her voice made him pause.
"Fine."
"Riverside Park. 3 o'clock." Lena nodded once, then turned and walked toward the subway entrance. She didn't look back. Vincent appeared at Marco's shoulder. Want us to follow her? No, Marco said quietly, watching her disappear into the crowd. Let her go.
For now.
Riverside Park at 3 o'clock was quieter than the downtown square. Autumn leaves skittered across the pathways, and the Hudson River reflected the afternoon sun in silver fragments. Marco arrived early with Nico, choosing a bench near the boat basin where the sound of water was constant and soothing. Nico seemed calmer here. He watched the boats with quiet fascination, his hands moving to sign their shapes and colors to Marco. What Marco didn't tell his son was that Dr. Reeves sat 50 yards away in an unmarked van, monitoring equipment ready. Or that Vincent was positioned near the walking path, pretending to read a newspaper. Or that Marco himself wore a small recording device in his jacket pocket. He wasn't proud of the deception, but he needed proof. Real, documented proof. Lena arrived at exactly 3 o'clock. She wore the same clothes as this morning, but she'd washed her face and pulled her hair back. She carried nothing except a plastic water bottle. When she saw Marco, she stopped, her eyes scanning the park with surprising thoroughness. You brought people, she said flatly. Marco's stomach dropped. The van with tinted windows. The guy with the newspaper who hasn't turned a page in 5 minutes. And whatever device you're wearing that has a little red light blinking under your collar. Marco glanced down. She was right. The recording device had a tiny indicator light he'd forgotten about. I need documentation, he said. The doctors need to. I should leave right now. Please don't. Marco stood, positioning himself between her and the exit path. Not threatening, just present. You're right. I brought people. But only because this matters. If Nico responds again, if we can prove it's real, maybe we can help other children like him. Or maybe you just want to control something you don't understand. The words hit harder than Marco expected. He thought of his empire, built on controlling every variable, every risk. She wasn't wrong. Maybe both things are true, he admitted. Lena looked past him to Nico. The boy had noticed her now, his eyes brightening with recognition. He signed something to Marco. A question. He's asking if you're the singing lady. Marco translated. Something in Lena's expression softened. Yeah, she said quietly. I am. She walked past Marco and sat on the grass a few feet from Nico's bench, close but not intrusive. Nico watched her curiously, then slid off the bench to sit across from her. Marco stayed standing, giving them space but keeping watch. For a long moment, Lena just looked at Nico. Then she began to hum, the same wordless melody from yesterday, soft and low. It rose and fell like breathing, like waves. Nico's reaction was immediate. His whole body stilled, focused. His eyes locked onto Lena's face, wide and searching. Marco saw his son's hands lift slightly, fingers trembling as if trying to catch something invisible. In the van, Dr. Reeves would be watching the monitors spike. Lena shifted the melody, taking it higher. Nico's breathing changed, faster, shallower. His right hand moved to his chest, pressing against his sternum as if he could feel the vibrations traveling through bone. Then something new happened. Nico leaned forward and placed his palm flat on the ground between them. Lena paused for just a moment, watching him, then did the same, her hand on the grass, maybe 6 inches from his. She started humming again, and this time Marco could see it. The way Nico's fingers pressed harder against the earth, the way his eyes closed, the way his breathing synchronized with the melody's rhythm. He wasn't hearing. Not exactly. But he was experiencing something, sensation, pattern, connection. A single tear rolled down Nico's cheek. Marco's chest constricted. His son never cried. Not from pain, not from frustration. The doctors said it was common in deaf children who felt isolated from emotional cues. But now Nico was crying. Lena saw it too. She didn't stop humming, but her free hand reached out slowly, carefully, and rested on top of Nico's hand on the grass. The boy's eyes opened. He looked at their joined hands, then up at Lena's face. And he smiled, a real, full smile that Marco hadn't seen in months. The melody faded. Lena lifted her hand away gently. Nico immediately began signing, his hands moving rapidly. Marco moved closer to translate.
He says.
He says it felt like music lived inside his bones. He wants to know if that's what hearing is. Lena's eyes glistened. Close enough, she said, though Nico couldn't hear her. Marco knelt beside his son and signed the answer. Nico nodded, his smile lingering, then suddenly wrapped his arms around Marco's neck in a fierce hug. Over Nico's shoulder, Marco looked at Lena. She was standing now, backing away slowly.
Wait, Marco said. Please.
Just. I did what you asked. The doctors need to understand how. No, her voice was firm. I don't know how. I just know it works. And your son is beautiful and deserves every chance. She paused. But I'm done being studied. I'll pay you anything. I told you. I don't want your money. She turned to leave, and Marco felt desperation rising. What do you want? Name it. Anything. Lena stopped. She looked back at him, and for the first time, he saw something break through her careful walls. I want to not be invisible anymore, she said quietly. But you can't buy that. She walked away through the fallen leaves. This time, Marco let her go. That night, Marco couldn't stop thinking about what Lena had said. I want to not be invisible anymore. He sat in his study, the room dark except for the lamp on his desk. Nico was asleep upstairs, still smiling even in his dreams. Dr. Reeves had called twice, excited about the readings talking about neuroplasticity and frequency response patterns. Marco had barely listened. Instead, he did what he always did when something didn't add up. He investigated. Marco opened his laptop and pulled up the private database his organization maintained, records of people, transactions, incidents going back 15 years. He typed in Lena and added filters: female, teenage, homeless, current city resident. 43 results. He added another filter: orphaned. 12 results. He stared at the screen, then added one more search parameter, one he'd been avoiding. He pulled up his organization's incident reports from 8 years ago, specifically the territorial dispute in the industrial district. 3 families had been caught in the crossfire. Collateral damage, his men had called it. Unavoidable, they'd said. Marco had been newer to leadership then, still proving himself, still making the hard choices that separated bosses from soldiers. He'd approved the operation. Signed off on it.
Moved on.
He'd never looked at the names. Now he did. His cursor hovered over one file: Castellano family, 2 adults deceased, 1 minor child, status unknown. Marco clicked it open. The father's name was David Castellano. The mother was Elena. They'd run a small music shop on Morrison Street. Instruments, repairs, lessons. Wrong place, wrong time. A rival gang had been using the building next door as a front. When Marco's men hit it, bullets went through walls. David and Elena died instantly. Their daughter, 8 years old at the time, had been at school. By the time social services arrived, she'd vanished into the system, then out of it entirely. Her name was listed as Angelina Castellano. Lena. Marco's hands went numb. He read the file 3 times, hoping he'd misunderstood, knowing he hadn't. There was a photo attached, a school picture from before. A little girl with pale gray eyes and a gap-toothed smile, holding a violin. He zoomed in on those eyes. Even at 8, they were the same, sharp, clear, seeing everything. Marco closed the laptop and sat in the darkness. For 20 years, he'd justified his choices. He'd told himself the violence was necessary, contained, directed only at those who chose the life. He'd told himself that innocent people didn't get hurt. He'd been lying, not just to others, to himself. The Castellanos hadn't chosen anything. They'd sold instruments and taught children and died because Marco needed to send a message to his enemies. Because territory mattered more than 2 lives he'd never met. And their daughter, the girl who'd just given his son a miracle, had been eating from garbage cans and sleeping on subway platforms for 8 years because of him. Marco stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, at the empire he'd built on decisions exactly like that one. For the first time in 2 decades, Guilt felt heavier than fear. His phone buzzed. Vincent's name appeared on the screen.
What? Marco answered.
Boss, we got a problem. Salvatore's crew has been asking questions.
Salvatore Nero.
Marco's main rival, always looking for weakness, for leverage. What kind of questions? About Nico. About a girl. They've got eyes on the park, the hospital. They know something's happening. Marco's blood went cold. How much do they know? Not everything, but enough to be interested. If Salvatore learned about Lena, about what she could do, he'd see opportunity. Leverage against Marco. Or worse, something to take for himself. Double security on Nico, Marco said. Move him to the safe house in Westchester tomorrow morning. What about the girl? Marco was quiet. Every instinct told him to bring Lena in, put her under protection whether she wanted it or not. Lock her away somewhere safe. But that's what had made her invisible in the first place. People with power deciding what was best for her, moving her around like a chess piece. Find her, Marco said finally. But don't approach. Just watch. If anyone else gets close to her, I want to know immediately. Understood. Marco ended the call and returned to his desk. He opened the laptop again, staring at that school photo. 8 years old, holding a violin, before the world taught her that she didn't matter. He thought about what she'd asked for. To not be invisible anymore. He couldn't give her parents back. Couldn't undo the bullet holes in a music shop wall. Couldn't erase 8 years of cold nights and empty stomachs. But maybe he could do something. Marco pulled up another file, his personal accounts, the ones that didn't appear in any official records. Money he'd set aside for emergencies, for escapes, for buying his way out of anything. He began making transfers, setting up trusts, creating paper trails that would protect a 16-year-old girl whether she knew it or not. It wouldn't fix anything, wouldn't make him less guilty. But it was a start. Upstairs, Nico slept peacefully, dreaming of music in his bones. Lena found out who Marco Leone really was 3 days later, in the worst possible way. She was sitting in her usual spot near the subway entrance when a woman stopped in front of her. Mid-40s, business suit, expensive handbag. The kind of person who normally walked past without seeing. "Your girl," the woman said. Lena looked up, wary. "What girl?" "The one singing for Marco Leone's son." The woman's face was tight with something, anger, maybe, or fear. "Do you have any idea who he is?" "A father. A killer." The woman crouched down, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "My brother worked for the Castellano family. 8 years ago, Leone's people shot up Morrison Street. My brother survived, but he told me what happened. Marco Leone ordered it. He killed innocent people." Lena's stomach turned to ice. "Castellano?" "A music shop. The owners died. They had a daughter." "Stop," Lena's voice came out strangled. The woman pulled out her phone, showing Lena a news article from 8 years ago. The headline, "Two Dead in Industrial District Shooting." Below it, a photo of a storefront with shattered windows. A name, Castellano Music. Lena couldn't breathe. She knew that storefront, knew those windows. She'd learned violin there in the back room that smelled like rosin and old wood. Her mother had taught lessons on Tuesdays. Her father had repaired instruments, his hands always gentle, always precise. "You need to stay away from him," the woman said. "Whatever he's paying you, it's not worth." Lena was already running. She shoved past commuters, her vision blurring. The subway entrance swallowed her, and she kept moving, through turnstiles, downstairs, onto a train just as the doors closed. She rode for 30 minutes, switching trains twice, not thinking, just moving. When she finally emerged, she was in a neighborhood she barely recognized. Her hands were shaking. Her chest felt crushed. Marco Leone had killed her parents. Not directly, maybe. Probably hadn't pulled the trigger himself. But he'd given the order. He'd decided their lives mattered less than his territory, his message, his power. And she'd sat with his son. She'd sung for him. She'd held his hand and smiled when he smiled. Lena found an alley and collapsed against a brick wall, sliding down until she sat on the cold concrete. For 8 years, she'd survived by not thinking about that day, by pushing the memories down so deep they couldn't reach her. Now they flooded back. The police officer's face when he told her. The foster home that smelled like cigarettes and disappointment. Running away at 12 because nowhere felt safe. Learning to be invisible because visible meant vulnerable. She'd built a life from nothing. It wasn't much, cardboard boxes and subway songs and donated coins, but it was hers. She'd survived. And then Marco Leone had walked into her life with his deaf son and his desperate eyes, and for 3 days, she'd let herself imagine something different. Something like purpose. Stupid. So stupid. Lena stayed in that alley until dark, then found an abandoned building she'd used before. She climbed through a broken window, found her hidden corner in the basement, and curled up with her cardboard sign as a pillow. She wouldn't go back to her usual spots. Wouldn't sing where his men could find her. She'd disappear, the way she'd learned 2 years ago. Marco knew something was wrong when Vincent called at 9 p.m. "She's gone, boss." "What do you mean gone?" "Left her spot this morning. Hasn't been back. We checked her usual locations, nothing." Marco felt dread settle in his stomach. What happened? Don't know. But one of Salvatore's people was seen near the subway entrance around the same time. A woman. Marco closed his eyes. Salvatore hadn't grabbed Lena. If he had, Marco would have received a ransom call by now. No, this was smarter. Salvatore had told her the truth. About Morrison Street. About who Marco really was.
"Find her," Marco said.
"Use everyone. Check shelters, churches, abandoned buildings. I want her found. Boss, maybe she doesn't want to be. I don't care what she wants. Salvatore knows about her now. If we don't find her first, he will." Marco ended the call and went upstairs to check on Nico. The boy was awake, sitting up in bed, signing questions. Where is Singing Lady? When does she come back? Marco's heart broke. He sat on the edge of the bed and signed slowly.
Soon.
I hope soon. But Nico shook his head, his face falling. He signed again, more insistent. She's not coming back. I know. How do you know? Marco asked aloud, forgetting Nico couldn't hear him. But his son seemed to understand anyway. Nico placed his hand over his heart, then opened it. The sign for feeling. For knowing something without words. Marco pulled Nico into a hug, and for the first time, his son's progress felt hollow. What did it matter if Nico could sense vibrations, if the one person who could reach him was gone? Worse, what did it matter if Marco had driven her away with sins he couldn't undo? That night, Marco made another decision. He called his lawyer and had him prepare documents. Then he called his most trusted men, not the enforcers, but the ones who handled logistics. I want Morrison Street bought, he said. The entire block. And I want the music shop restored exactly as it was. Boss, that's going to cost. I don't care what it costs. Do it. It wouldn't bring Lena's parents back. Wouldn't erase what he'd done. But maybe if she ever came back, she'd know he'd tried. Salvatore Nero made his move 4 days later. Marco was at the Westchester safe house when Vincent called, his voice tight with urgency. Boss, we've got a situation. Salvatore's men just grabbed someone off the street. Female, teenage, matches Lena's description. Marco's blood went cold. Where? Warehouse District. The old textile building on Porter Street. Same place they used last year for. I know where it is. Marco was already moving, grabbing his coat. How many men? At least 6 inside. Maybe more outside. Get everyone to Porter Street.
Now.
Marco, this could be a trap. Salvatore wants you to come. I don't care what he wants. Marco hung up and turned to Paolo, who was standing guard by the window. Stay with Nico. Lock everything down. Nobody gets in or out except me or Vincent.
Paolo nodded.
Be careful, boss. Marco drove himself, pushing his Mercedes through traffic with controlled precision. His mind raced. If Salvatore hurt Lena, if he even touched her, Marco would burn his entire operation to the ground. But a small voice in his head whispered, Why do you care so much? You've sacrificed people before. Why is she different?
He knew why.
Because she was innocent. Because he'd already taken her parents. Because his son's face lit up when she sang. Because guilt was a debt that compounded interest. 20 minutes later, Marco pulled up 3 blocks from the textile building. Vincent was waiting with 8 men, all armed, all tense. Salvatore's inside, Vincent confirmed. He sent word. Says he wants to talk. It's definitely her? They say so. But boss. What? Vincent hesitated. Something feels off. Salvatore's never been the kidnapping type. Too messy. Too much risk. Why take her now? Marco had wondered the same thing. Salvatore was calculating, patient. This move felt rushed, desperate even. Unless it wasn't about Lena at all. He's trying to draw me out, Marco said slowly. Away from Nico. Vincent's eyes widened. The safe house. Marco was already running back to his car. Phone pressed to his ear. Paolo, answer.
Paulo.
The call went to voicemail. Marco's hands shook as he dialed Nico's emergency pendant, a device his son wore that could send alerts. No response. Vincent, take half the men to Porter Street. If it's really Lena, get her out. I'm going back to Westchester. Boss, if it's a trap. Then I'm already too late. Marco drove faster than he ever had, running red lights, his heart hammering against his ribs. The safe house was 40 minutes away. 40 minutes, where anything could happen. He called his lawyer. If something happens to me tonight, everything goes to Nico. The trusts, the properties, all of it. And make sure the Castellano fund is protected, nobody touches it. Marco, what's going on? Just do it. He ended the call and pressed the accelerator harder. The safe house looked normal when Marco arrived.
Lights on.
No broken windows. His relief lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then he saw Paolo's body on the front steps. Marco was out of the car before it fully stopped, gun drawn. Paolo was breathing, unconscious, but alive. A professional hit, meant to disable, not kill. The front door was open. Marco moved through the house like a shadow, checking rooms systematically. Kitchen, clear. Living room, clear. Study, clear. He took the stairs 2 at a time, heading for Nico's bedroom.
The door was closed.
Marco pressed his ear against it, listening. Silence. He opened it slowly, leading with his gun. Nico sat on his bed, unharmed, eyes wide. Standing behind him, one hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder, was a man Marco recognized.
Antonio Russo.
Salvatore's underboss. Easy, Marco, Antonio said calmly. The kid's fine.
See?
Not a scratch. Marco's gun stayed level, aimed at Antonio's head. Get your hand off my son. In a minute. First we talk. There's nothing to talk about. I disagree, Antonio smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. See, Salvatore thinks you've gone soft. A deaf kid, a homeless girl, secret hospital visits. It's all very touching. But it's also weakness. Nico has nothing to do with business. Everything has to do with business. That's what you taught us. Antonio's hand tightened slightly on Nico's shoulder. The boy couldn't hear the conversation, but he sensed the tension, his breathing quick and shallow. Here's the deal, Antonio continued. Salvatore wants the port territory. You give it to him, quietly, and your son stays safe. You refuse and, well, he shrugged. Accidents happen. Even in safe houses. Marco's finger tightened on the trigger.
He could make the shot.
15 feet, clear line. But if Antonio had backup outside, if Marco missed, Nico would pay the price. 1 week, Marco said, his voice ice. I'll consider it. 3 days. 5 days. Or I kill Salvatore myself and start a war neither of us wins. Antonio studied him for a long moment, then nodded. 5 days. But Marco, the girl's gone. We looked everywhere. I can't find her, he smiled. Maybe she finally got smart and left the city. He removed his hand from Nico's shoulder and walked past Marco, pausing at the door. Clock's ticking, old friend. When he was gone, Marco locked the door and sat beside Nico. His son immediately wrapped his arms around him, trembling. Marco held him tight and made a decision. For the first time in 20 years, he would choose his son over his empire. Lena had been hiding in the old church for 6 days when she heard footsteps on the stone floor. She'd found the abandoned building on the city's outskirts 3 days ago, a Catholic church that had been closed for renovations and forgotten. The pews were covered in dust sheets, and broken stained glass let in shafts of colored light. It was cold, but it was safe. Or so she'd thought. The footsteps stopped near the altar. A single person, walking slowly, deliberately. Not trying to be quiet. Lena pressed herself against the wall behind the choir loft, barely breathing. "Lena," Marco's voice echoed through the empty space. "I know you're here. I came alone." She didn't answer. Couldn't trust it. "I'm going to sit down now," he continued. "In the front pew.
I'm unarmed.
You can check if you want." She heard him move, heard the old wood creak as he sat. Then silence. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, curiosity overcame caution. Lena crept to the edge of the loft and looked down. Marco sat in the front pew, hands folded, staring at the damaged crucifix above the altar. His expensive coat was dusty at the shoulders. He looked tired, more than tired. Hollowed out. "How did you find me?" she called down. He didn't turn around. "I've been searching for 6 days. Checked every abandoned building in a 50-mile radius. This was the 43rd. That's dedication. That's desperation." He paused. "You know who I am now. I know what you are." "It's the same thing." Marco's voice was flat, matter of fact. "I won't insult you by making excuses. Morrison Street happened because of me. I gave the order. Your parents died because I decided territory mattered more than people I'd never met." Lena felt her throat tighten. Hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Why are you here?" she managed. "Because my enemies know about you now. Because you're in danger whether you come with me or not. And because," he stopped, his voice catching, "because I owe you the truth. I already know the truth. Not all of it." Marco reached into his coat pocket, slowly, carefully, and pulled out a folder. He set it on the pew beside him. "I'm going to leave this here," he said. "Inside are bank account numbers, property deeds, legal documents. I've set up a trust in your name, your real name, Angelina Castellano. Enough money that you'll never sleep on cardboard again. A restored building on Morrison Street, your parents' music shop, rebuilt exactly as it was. It's yours. All of it." Lena stared down at him, stunned. "Why would you?" "Because I can't give you back what I took. But I can give you a future." He stood slowly, still not looking up at the loft. "I'm also leaving the city. Nico and I, tomorrow night. I'm walking away from everything, the organization, the territory, all of it. My enemies wanted me weak, and they were right. I am weak. Because I can't do this anymore." "Do what?" "Pretend the cost is acceptable," his voice broke. "Pretend that 8-year-old orphans are just collateral damage. Pretend that power matters more than—" He stopped, composing himself. "I'm done pretending." Lena climbed down from the loft slowly, her footsteps echoing. She approached the pew, but kept her distance, standing in the center aisle. Marco finally turned to face her. In the colored light filtering through broken glass, she could see tears on his face. "Nico asks about you every day," he said quietly. "Signs your name, asks when you're coming back. I tell him I don't know, but the truth is—" He took a shaky breath. "The truth is he was getting better. With you. And now he's regressing. He's frustrated, angry. He doesn't understand why you left. I left because you killed my parents. I know. You destroyed my entire life. I know. And now you want me to help you again? Help your son?" Marco shook his head.
No.
"I want you to have the choice I never gave your parents. I'm asking, not taking. If you say no, I'll walk away and never contact you again. The trust is yours either way. The building is yours. You don't owe me anything." Lena looked at the folder on the pew. A future. Security. Her parents' legacy restored. Everything she'd dreamed about for 8 years. But the cost was forgiving the unforgivable. "I need to think," she whispered. "Take all the time you need. We leave tomorrow at 8 p.m. from Westchester. There's an address in the folder." Marco walked toward the church entrance, then paused. "For what it's worth, your parents raised someone extraordinary. Someone who survived hell and still has kindness left. They'd be proud of you." He left the folder and walked out into the fading daylight. Lena stood alone in the abandoned church, staring at the folder like it might bite her. Inside was a choice: let the past define her forever, or take the first step toward something else. Something like healing. She picked up the folder with trembling hands and began to read. Lena arrived at the Westchester address at 7:45 p.m. The safe house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by trees turning gold and crimson in the autumn evening. Lights glowed warmly in the windows. It looked peaceful, almost ordinary, nothing like the world Marco came from. She stood at the end of the driveway for 5 minutes, the folder tucked under her arm, trying to decide if she was making the right choice. She'd spent all night reading the documents. The trust was real, more money than she could process. The Morrison Street property deed was in her name. Legal papers transferring ownership, restoration plans, everything. He'd meant what he said. Whether she helped or not, it was hers. But that wasn't why she'd come. She'd come because somewhere in the past week, between the anger and the grief, she'd realized something. Nico was as much a victim as she was. Different circumstances, different pain, but both of them had been shaped by Marco's world without choosing it. And unlike her, Nico still had a chance at a father who was trying to be better. Lena walked up the driveway and knocked. Marco opened the door. His face went through several emotions at once: surprise, relief, fear, hope. He looked different in casual clothes, no suit jacket, sleeves rolled up. More human. "You came," he said quietly. "I came for Nico. Not for you." "I understand." He stepped aside and Lena entered. The house was simply furnished but comfortable. Through the doorway, she could see Nico sitting on a couch, a picture book open on his lap. When he saw her, his whole face transformed. He jumped up, signing rapidly, his hands moving so fast Lena couldn't follow. But she understood the emotion behind it. Pure joy. Marco translated, his voice thick. "He says he knew you'd come. He could feel it." Nico ran to Lena and wrapped his arms around her waist, squeezing tight. She froze for a moment, unused to being touched, then slowly returned the embrace. "Hi, Nico," she said softly, knowing he couldn't hear but saying it anyway. When they separated, Nico took her hand and pulled her toward the couch, signing questions Marco had to translate. "Will you sing? Can you stay? Are you hungry?" "Tell him I'll sing," Lena said. "And I can stay for a little while." Marco's hands moved in sign language, and Nico's smile somehow grew wider. That night, in the quiet countryside, Lena sang. They sat in the backyard where the air was cool and still. Nico sat cross-legged on the grass, Lena a few feet away. Marco watched from the porch, giving them space, his phone recording everything for the doctors who'd asked to monitor progress. Lena started with the same melody she'd used before, soft and low. Nico responded immediately, his eyes closing, his hands resting palms down on the earth. But this time, she did something different. She'd been thinking about it all day, remembering her mother's lessons about resonance and vibration. She moved closer and began to hum directly toward Nico's chest, where his sternum could conduct the vibrations most effectively. Then she gently took his hands and placed them on her throat, so he could feel the sound source. Nico's eyes flew open, startled. But he didn't pull away. Lena could feel his pulse racing under his fingertips, could see the wonder spreading across his face. She varied the melody, higher, lower, faster, slower, and watched his expressions change with each shift. He was learning. Not hearing in the traditional sense, but learning to recognize patterns, to distinguish between frequencies, to understand that these vibrations had meaning. After 20 minutes, she stopped and pulled back gently. Nico immediately signed something. Marco stepped off the porch to translate, his voice unsteady. He says it felt like you gave him a language he didn't know he was missing. Lena felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Tell him we'll practice every day. If that's okay.
Marco translated.
Nico nodded enthusiastically, then signed something else. He wants to know if you'll teach him your songs. All of them, Lena promised. Over the next 3 weeks, a routine developed. Every morning, Lena arrived at the safe house. She and Nico would spend 2 hours working on what she called listening with bones, exercises where he'd feel vibrations through different materials, learn to distinguish between tones, build his awareness of sound as a physical experience. The doctors came weekly, amazed by the progress. Nico's auditory cortex was forming new pathways, adapting in ways they'd thought impossible. It wasn't traditional hearing, but it was communication, connection. In the afternoons, Marco would join them, learning sign language more fluently so he could keep up with his son's growing vocabulary. Lena noticed how he'd changed, softer, somehow more present. He cooked meals for them, simple pasta and bread. He laughed at Nico's jokes. He never mentioned his old life, and Lena didn't ask. One evening, as sunset painted the sky orange, Nico fell asleep between them on the couch, his head on Lena's lap, his feet on Marco's. "Thank you," Marco whispered, "for giving him this." Lena looked down at the sleeping boy. "He's easy to love. So are you." She glanced at Marco sharply, but his face showed only honesty, no manipulation. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said quietly. "I know. I'm not asking you to, but I'm willing to try. Eventually. For him." Marco nodded, and Lena saw tears in his eyes again. He cried more easily now, she'd noticed, as if whatever wall he'd built around his emotions had finally cracked. Outside, night fell softly over the countryside. Inside, something like a family was learning to breathe together. It happened on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after Lena had first arrived at the safe house. The autumn had deepened into early winter. Frost covered the grass each morning, and Nico had taken to wearing the thick sweater Lena had bought him, navy blue with a small guitar embroidered on the chest. She'd found it at a thrift store and thought of her parents' music shop. They were in the backyard again, their usual spot. Marco was inside making breakfast, the smell of coffee and pancakes drifting through the open kitchen window. Dr. Reeves had visited yesterday and reported that Nico's progress was exceeding every projection. His brain was adapting, creating new neural pathways, learning to interpret vibrations as information. But he still hadn't spoken. Not a single word. The doctor said it might never happen. Speaking required hearing yourself, adjusting your voice, understanding the relationship between sound and speech. For someone who'd never heard, vocalization was like trying to paint without seeing colors. Lena had accepted that. The connection they'd built was enough. The way Nico's face lit up when she sang, the way he'd learned to distinguish between different tones, the way he pressed his palm against the piano in the living room and smiled at the vibrations. It was more than enough. She was humming softly, a new melody she'd been working on, something slower, more deliberate. Nico sat close, his eyes closed, completely focused. Then he opened his mouth. The sound that came out was barely audible, rough and uncertain. It wasn't a word, just a broken attempt at matching the pitch she'd been humming. But it was intentional. Lena stopped immediately, her heart racing. "Nico." He opened his eyes, looking confused. Then he tried again, and this time the sound was clearer. A hum. Not quite matching her tone, but trying to. "Oh my God," Lena whispered.
Marco.
"Marco, come here." Marco appeared in the doorway within seconds, alarmed. "What's wrong?" "He's trying to hum." "Listen." Marco stepped outside, and Lena began humming again, the same gentle melody. Nico watched her intensely, then opened his mouth and produced that rough, tentative sound. Marco's legs seemed to give out. He sat down heavily on the porch steps, his hand over his mouth. Lena moved closer to Nico and placed his hand on her throat again, so he could feel the vibrations as she hummed. Then she placed his other hand on his own throat and nodded encouragingly. Nico hummed again. This time, she could see the moment he felt his own throat vibrating, felt the sound he was creating. His eyes went wide with wonder. He did it again. And again. Each time getting slightly better, slightly more controlled. Keep going, Lena said, even though he couldn't hear her. She signed the words Marco had taught her. Beautiful.
Keep trying.
They worked for another 20 minutes, Nico learning to feel the difference between high and low sounds, between loud and soft. He was clumsy, inconsistent, but he was doing it. Finally, Lena decided to try something. She took both of his hands and placed them on either side of her face, so he could feel her jaw moving, her lips forming shapes. Then she spoke a single word, slowly and clearly. Papa. She felt his fingers twitch as he sensed the vibrations, the movement of her mouth. Then she pointed to Marco on the porch. Nico looked at his father for a long moment. Marco was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. Nico turned back to Lena and put his hands on his own face, mimicking the position. He took a breath. Pa. It was barely there, more breath than voice.
He tried again. Pa, pa.
The sound was broken, unclear, the syllables disconnected. But it was a word. An actual, intentional word. Marco stood up slowly, walking toward them like he was in a dream. He knelt in front of Nico, eye level with his son. Say it again, Marco whispered, knowing Nico couldn't hear him but unable to stay silent. Please say it again. Nico looked at his father's face, saw the tears, and seemed to understand. He placed one hand on Marco's chest, feeling his heartbeat, anchoring himself. Then he spoke.
Papa.
Clear this time. Still rough, still uncertain, but unmistakably a word. Unmistakably directed at Marco. Marco let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He pulled Nico into his arms and held him like he'd never let go, his shoulders shaking. Nico couldn't hear his father crying, couldn't hear him saying, "Thank you," over and over into his hair. But he could feel the embrace, the trembling, the overwhelming emotion. And when Marco finally pulled back, his hands shaking, he signed something to Nico. Lena had learned enough to understand. I love you. I love you. I love you. Nico signed back, his small hands precise. I love you too, Papa. Then he turned to Lena and signed. Thank you for teaching me his name. Lena couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She joined the embrace, and the three of them sat in the frost-covered grass as the morning sun climbed higher. Inside, the pancakes burned on the stove. Nobody cared. The call came 2 days after Nico spoke his first word. Marco was in the study, reviewing documents his lawyer had sent, legal papers that would formally dissolve his stake in the organization, transferring operations to a council of his former lieutenants. It was the final step in walking away completely. Vincent's name flashed on the screen. Boss, former boss. We've got a problem. Marco's stomach tightened. What kind of problem? Salvatore knows you're leaving. He's calling it weakness, saying you abandoned your territory. He's moving on your old operations, absorbing them, Vincent paused. And he's put a price on your head. $2 million. Dead, not alive. Marco closed his eyes. He'd known this was coming. The moment he'd chosen Nico over power, he'd made himself a target. How long do I have? Days, maybe. He's already sent people north. They're looking for the safe house. Then I move again. Nico, and I will disappear. Marco, listen to me. It's not just Salvatore. It's everyone. You dismantled the Morrison Street operation, the same one that killed the Castellanos. Word got out about why you did it. Now, every family in the city sees you as soft, as compromised. They're circling. Marco felt rage building, not at Vincent, but at himself. He'd known there would be consequences. He just hadn't calculated how fast they'd come. What about my men? Are they safe? Most are taking Salvatore's offers. The ones loyal to you are hiding. But Marco. Vincent's voice dropped. There's something else. Salvatore knows about Lena. Knows she's with you. He's saying if he can't have you, he'll take what matters to you. Marco's blood turned to ice. When? Could be tonight. Could be tomorrow. I don't know. Marco hung up and immediately called for Paolo. Pack everything. We're leaving in 30 minutes. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Running would only delay the inevitable. Salvatore would keep hunting, and eventually he'd find them, unless Marco ended it first. That night, after Nico was asleep, Marco found Lena in the kitchen making tea. "We need to talk," he said quietly. She turned, and whatever she saw in his face made her set down the kettle. "What's wrong?" Marco told her everything. The contract on his life, Salvatore's threats, the men who were coming. Lena listened in silence, her face growing pale. "I'm taking Nico somewhere safe tonight," Marco finished. "Somewhere even I won't know the location. My lawyer has arranged it. But you need to leave too. Use the trust fund, go anywhere in the world, disappear." "And you?" "I'm going back to the city. That's suicide. It's the only way to end this. If I'm dead, the contract's fulfilled. Salvatore gets what he wants, and there's no reason to keep hunting Nico or you." Lena stared at him. "You're going to let them kill you?" "I'm going to face the consequences of my choices," Marco's voice was steady. "For 20 years, I hurt people and justified it. I told myself it was business, that it was necessary. But it wasn't. It was convenience. Cowardice." He met her eyes. "I can't undo the past. But I can make sure my son has a future. That you have a future." "This is insane." "It's the only option." Marco pulled out an envelope and set it on the counter. "Inside are instructions for accessing the trust, contacts for my lawyer, everything you need. When Nico's older, tell him I loved him. Tell him his father finally did the right thing." Lena grabbed his arm. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." "Then take it all back. Give Salvatore the territory, the operations, whatever he wants. Negotiate." "I already tried. He doesn't want territory anymore. He wants me dead," as an example. Marco gently removed her hand. "This is my debt, Lena. I've been running from it for 8 years. I'm done running." He started to walk away, but her voice stopped him. "Your parents would hate this plan," she said quietly. Marco turned back. "What?" "Nico's parents. Me and you were all he is now. And you're going to orphan him on purpose? Make him lose another person he loves?" Her voice shook. "That's not redemption. That's just more damage." Her words hit like a physical blow. "Then what do I do?" Marco asked, and for the first time, he sounded lost. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and made a call. "Dr. Reeves? It's Lena. I need you to tell everyone about Nico's case. The media, medical journals, everyone. His real name, his father's identity, all of it." She looked at Marco as she spoke. "Make us so public that touching us would bring attention Salvatore can't afford." She ended the call and faced Marco.
"You don't get to die.
"You get to live with what you've done and spend the rest of your life being better. That's the harder choice." Marco felt something break open in his chest, something that felt like grief and hope tangled together. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Outside, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. They were out of time. The headlights belonged to Dr. Reeves. She burst through the door with her phone already recording, her voice sharp and professional. "Marco Leone, I'm documenting this for medical and legal records. Your son Nico has made unprecedented progress in auditory development despite profound deafness. This case will be published in every major journal by morning." Behind her, 2 news vans pulled up the driveway.
Marco stared.
"How did you?" "I made calls on the way here. CNN, medical networks, research institutions. By dawn, Nico's story goes global." Dr. Reeves looked at him hard. "You're not the only one who can make strategic moves." Lena grabbed Marco's arm. "Get Nico. We need him visible, safe, surrounded by witnesses." Marco ran upstairs and gently woke his son. Nico signed groggily. "What's happening?" "We're going to be on television," Marco signed back. "To tell people about your miracle." By the time they came downstairs, the living room had transformed into a media circus. Cameras, lights, reporters asking questions. Dr. Reeves was already explaining Nico's condition, Lena's unique vocal frequencies, the unprecedented neural adaptation. Marco held Nico close as flashes went off. His son pressed against him, overwhelmed but safe. A reporter thrust a microphone forward. "Mr. Leone, is it true you're leaving organized crime to focus on your son's treatment?" Marco looked directly into the camera.
Yes.
"I'm done with that life. My only priority now is my son and making amends for my past." Including the Morrison Street incident 8 years ago. Marco's jaw tightened. Lena's hand found his, squeezing tight. "Yes," he said clearly. "Including that. I take full responsibility. I can't undo what happened, but I'm using my resources to fund hearing research and restore what was destroyed." The interview lasted an hour. By the time the news crews left, the story was already breaking online. #MiracleBoy was trending. Medical forums were exploding. The pressure of public attention was a shield nothing could penetrate without massive consequences. Salvatore would have to back off. The cost was too high. 3 weeks later, the immediate danger had passed. Salvatore had issued a statement through intermediaries. The contract was void, the territory disputes resolved through negotiation. Marco had given up everything, his operations, his power, his reputation, but gained something more valuable: freedom. They moved to a small coastal town in Oregon, far from the city and its memories. Marco used what remained of his legitimate assets to buy a house near the ocean, where Nico could watch waves and feel their rhythm in his bones. Lena came with them, not out of obligation but choice. She still wasn't sure if she'd forgiven Marco completely. Some wounds were too deep for quick healing. But she was learning that redemption wasn't a single moment. It was a daily practice, a commitment to being better than yesterday. And Marco was trying. Really trying. He cooked meals, learned to braid Lena's hair when she asked, spent hours playing with Nico in the sand. The doctors came monthly to monitor progress, always amazed by the results. Nico was now vocalizing simple words regularly, his voice growing stronger and more controlled. One morning in December, Lena woke early to watch the sunrise from the back porch. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, gray-blue and vast. She'd started writing songs again, real ones, the kind her mother used to sing. The kind that carried memory and hope in equal measure. She heard the door open behind her. Nico padded out in his pajamas, his dark curls messy with sleep. He climbed into the chair beside her and leaned against her shoulder. Lena began to hum softly, a new melody she'd been working on, something about waves and healing and home. Nico listened, his hand resting on her arm to feel the vibrations. Then he lifted his head and looked at her with those serious dark eyes. "Lena," he said. Her name. Clear and intentional. She felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, Nico." He paused, concentrating, then spoke again. The words came slowly, carefully shaped. "Love you." Lena's breath caught. She pulled him close, holding him tight. "I love you too, sweetheart." Behind them, the door opened again. Marco stood there in his robe, coffee mug in hand, watching them. When Nico saw him, his face lit up. "Papa," he called, his voice carrying across the porch. Marco's coffee mug trembled. He set it down quickly and joined them, wrapping both of them in his arms. They sat together as the sun rose over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in the house, Marco's phone was ringing, probably his lawyer, or Dr. Reeves, or someone from the foundation he'd created to fund hearing research. But he didn't move to answer it. For the first time in his life, Marco Leone was exactly where he needed to be. Nico pulled back and placed his small hand on Marco's chest, feeling his heartbeat. Then he looked up at his father and spoke again, his voice stronger now, more confident.
"Papa."
Happy. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, a truth the boy had learned to sense without hearing. Marco kissed the top of his son's head, tears streaming down his face. "Yes," he whispered. "Papa's happy." Lena began to sing, not hum, but truly sing, the new melody she'd been composing. Her voice carried over the sound of waves, clear and strong, and full of something that felt like forgiveness. Nico closed his eyes and smiled, feeling every note in his bones. The miracle wasn't just that he could sense sound. The miracle was that all three of them, broken by the same violence, scarred by the same past, had found each other and chosen healing over hatred. Had chosen love over everything else. And that, Marco finally understood, was the only redemption that mattered.